Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Soffer, and I am the co-founder of Modern Loss, which is an in real life and a virtual community helping people through the long arc of grief and loss and all the things that come with it. And I am so honored to be able to be the host of 1-800-Flowers series, Light After Loss. This is our fifth edition in the series that we started late last year during a time when which all of us were pretty much stuck at home, and a lot of us are still kind of stuck at home and starting to venture out into the real world. It's mid-May, it's getting warmer, and so we're starting to look at more conversations that we think might need to take place as we start kind of coming together again after being apart for so long. And that's why we're here today to talk about empathy. And this is a big buzzword, everybody's talking about empathy, but we're going to get into like, what does empathy actually mean? And how can we be more empathetic toward each other? And how can we ask for more empathy in return? And I'm so excited to introduce Cotler Ray as my guest this afternoon. Cotler is a master trainer with Empathy Bootcamp and is assistant professor of communication at San Diego State University, where he directs the Human Communication Laboratory. But in the fall, he's going to be joining the faculty of Louisiana State University. So I think at this very moment, Cotler is probably speaking to us from a half-packed house, and we're really grateful for his time. He's a researcher and a training expert, and he has worked to change how people connect with others in times of suffering. So, let's just get right into it. Cotler, thanks so much for speaking with me this afternoon. I'm really excited that you're here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm excited to chat with you today.
So tell us, first, I am so curious. What is a guy doing out in the world, or a girl for that matter, deciding, what I'm going to spend my life doing? I'm going to spend my life trying to figure out how people can support each other better, and also maybe why they don't. What happened to you as a kid? Do tell.
I actually had a pretty great childhood, so not like
I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's not some terrible trauma, but it was just more whenever I'd have friends going through a tough time growing up, I always felt like, I wonder what I could say to make things better, which was, just kind of the starting point. And then realizing as I got older and got into young adulthood and further into my life, that a lot of people don't know what to say, and sometimes they actually say the wrong thing, or they decide not to say anything at all because they're maybe too petrified to have those more emotional conversations. And so figuring out the why to those questions ended up being something that has driven my entire career as a professor.
That's amazing. Well, I personally want to thank you for your work in the world, because I think, first of all, it's amazing how many ways you can make a living. And I'm so glad that somebody can make a living, by studying and teaching others how they can be more empathetic toward each other. So let's just go basic before we go really deep. What is empathy? We see it everywhere. It's on flash all over, Hallmark cards and social media posts, and it's a big buzzword. And, but what is it?
Yeah, at its core, it's really just the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and to try to understand what they're going through. And sometimes that means that you end up, to some extent, co-experiencing what they're going through, right? And if you really can put yourself in that other person's mindset and understand what it is that they're experiencing, then you are experiencing empathy.
Yeah. What can empathy accomplish? Why do we need empathy in the world?
Yeah, maybe some of you feel the same way I have felt throughout the pandemic, which is I just am getting increasingly frustrated with like everything, whether it's family, friends, work. It's just everything's kind of stacked up. And empathy is a great way is a great practice to engage in, to reframe and to really think about what other people are going through. And so maybe you've had a frustrating day, but thinking about what other people have gone through and putting yourself in their shoes can be a way that can help you kind of see where you are in the world and to help contextualize your experiences. And to be honest, I've had a relatively easygoing pandemic. There's been some troubles in my life, but other people have had it much worse. And whenever I speak with people who've lost loved ones, for example, and really empathize with that, it really can do a lot for you as the person who's engaging in empathy to put your own experiences into perspective.
Yeah. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of joy. We have been under lockdown. We've been through a terrifying time, right? And so there's joy coming out of it. At the same time, we've been through a terrifying time. We've had almost 600,000 people die from COVID alone in the last year in the United States alone. And so when you think about how many people have been affected by a COVID death or a COVID illness or long COVID or losing somebody, to another, disease or just like old age or an accident. There's a lot of grief out there. And then there's a lot of adverse situations that don't even have to do with death loss. There's been loss of jobs, there's been loss of friendship, loss of identity. But really, we've also just all been through a pandemic. So we've all had a rough time, right? And so I feel like as we get together, we have this expectation that it's hopefully going to be all happy, but we have a lot of stuff that we also have to share. And it seems a little disingenuous to feel like we have to be forced to gloss all of that over, right? Kind of like delete whatever bad, whatever scary has happened to us in the last year. And so, how do we kind of start dipping our toe in that socializing pool with friends and family, first time reuniting in a year and say, oh my gosh, it's so great to see you, but also, hey, this has been a really bad year. Let's talk about it. Like, how do we even start to do that in a comfortable way?
I love this question because it brings up a great point, which is I think we are all thinking of the first 5 minutes of our interactions with people we haven't seen, which is like maybe a big hug if you're comfortable doing that. And then like, I miss you. It's so great to see you. But there's about to be a lot of heavy conversations about like you said, the various types of grieving people have gone through for lost loved ones or lost jobs or just other things that have been lost over the past 15 months. And I don't think many of us have thought about that. I think we're all still thinking like, I just can't wait to go have brunch with my friends again, not thinking those conversations are right around the corner. And so that's what we can talk about today is like, how can we guide those conversations? And I think one of the most important things that we can look at is how to be a great listener. And some of the things that you can do to spark those conversations and allow people to have space to open up, and also things to avoid so that you don't shut down those conversations. And so I'll start with this. Let's start with just 3 simple rules for being a good listener. These are going to sound so obvious, but we don't do them. So these are going to be reminders of things we should do. And the first one is stop talking. I know you're going to have a lot to say whenever you see your friends again. But if they start heading down that path of like, well, maybe they lost a grandparent or a parent, it's really important that you, as much as you want to interject or interrupt, that you really just stop and make a conscious, focused effort to be 100% dedicated to listening to that person. And in doing so, also another suggestion that might seem counterintuitive, don't think about how to respond. And this might seem like it's the exact opposite, but here's what ends up happening is someone starts sharing with you something really heavy. And many of us start thinking, oh gosh, this is intense. What do I say? What am I going to do? I hope I don't say the wrong thing. And as you have that train of thought that I just went through, you have stopped paying attention to that person. And so it's so important to really, truly engage fully with that person. Don't worry about what your response is going to be. And then even when they're done, give them a couple more seconds of silence. It might feel like an eternity to you, but sometimes that extra little bit of silence, in addition to giving you a second to collect your thoughts, also gives them a little bit more space to continue sharing. Sometimes people share something and they hold back a little piece of information. And if you wait and don't respond right away, it invites them to maybe consider adding in this one little bit of information they were going to hold back. which can be really important to you as a supporter to hear the whole picture, to hear the whole story. And so, stop talking and don't think about how to respond, and then give them a couple seconds of silence at the end before you respond. And we can talk about, of course, the things you can say in your responses, but I think that's such an important part of the whole process, is to start off as a great listener. That's going to be the foundation for the rest of that conversation.
I gave an extra couple seconds just there in case you were going to add something. And I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you, because as somebody who is I'm a journalist by training, and, it's that part of the interview process that is sometimes the most precious and vulnerable, because when you stop talking and you're just really listening to someone, they feel like you're listening, like this is like a safe space they can share. You're not interjecting them. And sometimes at the very end of their thought, when, you make it clear that you're not jumping in with a fix or a suggestion, that's when they really feel like they can get to the nut of it. And so would you call this like active listening? What type of listening is this?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. What I just described is very much active listening. And again, just a couple other things you can do, or one of the most important things you can do, it's a very simple act that a lot of us forget to do, is put away our cell phones. Obviously, if you're sitting there texting while someone's speaking to you, you're not being a very active listener. But some research has actually shown just the presence of a cell phone on a table actually takes away from the depth and the breadth of the conversation being had. So putting away that cell phone out of sight and out of mind is really an act of good faith to really show the person that you are serious about being 100% committed to listening to their experience.
So let's talk about empathy starters, because, this is kind of like your wheelhouse. Just phrase it, because we get out at Modern Loss, so even by our community members who they get grief, they get adversity, and they still ask us, my friend is going through such a tough time, and I didn't go through the same exact tough time as them, so I don't actually know how to support them or do something that's actually meaningful. Like, what do I say? What do I do? And a lot of the things, I would say, like, we often say the things that you shouldn't say, because I do feel like there are a lot of things that, are not helpful. I don't really believe that a lot of platitudes out there are helpful, which are, assuring people that it's, going to be okay and within a certain time frame, or, saying, I know exactly how you feel, because, you really don't. What are some phrases and questions that we can use to stoke empathetic conversations? Do you have any, do you have like a toolkit that you can give people here, like a cheat sheet?
That's exactly what I refer to it. I call these empathy starters are like tools in the toolkit. I use these all the time. In fact, I was having a conversation yesterday with someone really important in my life who just lost their mom. And first off, I just want to say, even as someone who studies this for a living, whenever that conversation happens, my first reaction is still, oh gosh, this is heavy. What am I going to say? And it's like, I literally teach this for a living and research it, but I still have that quick moment of anxiety. And then I remember there are things that are really simple phrases and questions that you can ask. And we call these empathy starters. And so one of the best ones you can ask, or the best ones you can say, is to ask, well, how are you doing today? And that extra little part of today is so important, because as you mentioned earlier, there's this long arc of the grief process. You're not going to grieve the loss of a loved one in a 24-hour period. It's something that might take months, if not years, to get over. And so whenever someone asks you, how are you doing? You typically kind of generalize and you say, well, I'm making it through. And it kind of stops the conversation. But if you ask someone, how are you doing today? It gives them permission to open up a little bit more about how they are at this moment and where they are in the general process. So their response is going to be better. It's going to be something along the lines of, well, today's been a really good day, but in general, I'm still struggling. And here's why. Or today's been a pretty bad day because maybe this day's meaningful to that relationship, but overall I'm getting through. And it just allows them to talk about and be honest with you that maybe today's a rough day, but overall it's going well. And so, you can say, how are you doing today? Or how are you doing with this right now? And that gives them a chance to give a little bit better or more detailed answer. And one of the things too, that is another great tool for your toolkit, if you really don't know what to say, is just start off by saying, I'm sorry this has happened to you. And that's just something a lot of us overlook and forget to do and forget to say, is to take a moment, take a breath, and before you say anything else, just say, I'm so sorry this happened to you, Rebecca, or I'm so sorry this happened to you, whoever it is you're talking to. And that's just an important thing to hear, is that it validates that this is indeed a sucky situation, and it can really go a long way. So those are a couple of my favorite empathy starters that you can use.
So if we're in a social situation, and even like with friends with whom we really feel comfortable, we feel like our friends aren't really, giving us what we need, what are some things we can do and say to get those things? How can we help ourselves?
Yeah, really, the research has shown that the more direct you are with the people that are important to you in your life about what you need in a given moment, when it comes to support, the more satisfied you'll be with the support that you receive. And so we've already been through so much that what's another little act of vulnerability, right? Is the way I think of it. And so whenever you do finally see that friend who you haven't seen in a year again, and you are reunited and you're having a great conversation, if they're really someone that cares about you, they're going to respond well whenever you say something like, hey, to be honest, like, I'm sure we've all been through a lot, but I was wondering, can I kind of just vent to you or share with you some of the things that are on my mind and maybe get your perspective on it. And what's nice about that is the social rules around like self-disclosure and sharing that type of information typically revolve around reciprocity. And so usually you have these encounters where like maybe both sides are yearning to reach out and have these conversations. And it just takes one person to like actually start the conversation. And that allows them then to reciprocate and maybe share what they're going through. So I would encourage you to take that leap of faith and be a little bit vulnerable and share, hey, like, I'm going through some stuff right now, and I really would like to hear maybe your opinion or perspective on it. And you'd be surprised that once that conversation takes that turn, how often the other person, after they're done being a great listener, turns around and says, well, you know what? It turns out, we've gone through something similar, or I've gone through, a loss in a family as well. And I've been really wanting to reach out to someone, and I haven't had that conversation yet. So break down that facade and go for it in terms of being a little bit vulnerable. That's something that I encourage you to do. On the flip side, if you sense that the other person wants to have that conversation and they just aren't really doing that, again, just be direct and say, hey, like, are you doing okay? Like, how are you really doing right now? And if you want to talk, let me know. And those are some other great empathy starters as well, is just making that offer of like, this has been a heavy 15 months. If you want, I'm here for you to have those conversations and to work through the things that we've suffered through together.
Yeah. So a couple of things came up to me while you were speaking. The first is kind of, what we call at Modern Loss, like the grief Olympics, which, we could also put it like the adversity Olympics, right? Like, what if you're in conversation with someone and they're telling you all of these really legitimately, like overtly awful things that have happened in their lives. And, it's like death and destruction, and maybe their house burned down in a forest fire. I mean, who knows? I mean, everything has happened in the world in the last year, seemingly. And you really would love to share the fact that you lost your job and it's been really hard. And you think, oh, shoot, I don't think I can share this now because it doesn't remotely compare to what they've been through. But, there's, at least I say, there's no Olympic, like, this isn't a competition, right? Like, if it feels like something that's meaningful and tough for you, it's worth sharing. But like, how do you get over that, sort of nervousness?
Yeah. Actually, my advice, to be honest, would be to maybe not share in that moment what you're going through. If someone has clearly gone through something that's exponentially worse than your own situation, then jumping back to our earlier conversation, I would dedicate your attention fully to being a great listener and supporter for that person. And in fact, one of the missteps we commonly see people make when they're trying to be a good listener is they make it all about themselves. We at the Empathy Bootcamp call that the all about me non-listening style. And as tempting as it would be to try to connect with the person and say, well, I also had a terrible 2020 as well. It's not likely that that's what they're really looking for. They probably are looking for someone that they can vent to. So instead of trying to match their grief Olympics or their adversity level, or to share your own experiences, in that moment, it might be better to really seek out ways for them to fully share what they're going through. So jumping back to our empathy starters, another great one to use in these situations, whenever someone goes through something really difficult, is to ask, what has that been like for you specifically? Because someone goes through a cancer diagnosis, or they lose their job, or they go through a divorce, or COVID strikes in their family. And it's tempting for us to just assume that we know what that's like. Maybe we've had someone in our family diagnosed with cancer and we assume it's going to be similar. And that's a common misstep, is to assume that grief is the same across all people in the same situation. So instead of sharing your adversity, which you can maybe bring up in a future conversation, instead really try to seek to understand what's been unique about their situation. They will appreciate that so much, because they will have found that most people hear, there's a cancer diagnosis in the family, and then everyone just assumes they know what that means. But if you ask them, how's that been for you specifically?
Right.
Wow, now they have a chance to really share their story. And it's all about being selfless and being a good supporter for them in that moment. Future conversations, you can bring up your own stuff, but that would be my honest advice.
Yeah, that's a good. Thanks for being honest. I appreciate that. I appreciate honesty more than ever these days, Cotler. Right. So let me ask, since this is like a real life scenario that we're envisioning, where we're not like robots and like reading scripts, like eventually there will be a time where you feel like you need to segue out of the tough stuff, because maybe you want to talk about like, oh my gosh, like we can go to a baseball game again, or like, who's dating who, or like, so what bad TV did you watch? How do we feel comfortable, in conversations, without saying, oh my God, I don't want to be disrespectful and switch the subject. But like, let's say we're finished sharing, or we sense that someone else has finished sharing, like help us out here. Like, how do we just like, fold in these difficult topics, but also feel like, we can still be ourselves?
Yeah. One of the best ways to do this, and while still being a good listener, is to engage in some paraphrasing of what you heard back to from the person. Mm-hmm. So, and this is great even in conflict too, whenever you and your significant other, your romantic partner, a sibling, a family member, or just at each other.
Small child.
Yeah. Whenever you're in conflict or in these situations of support, whenever they're sharing something with you, if you can say back to them and paraphrase in your own words what you've heard them say. So what I hear you saying is that like the hardest part hasn't been necessarily working from home. It's been dealing with working from home and being around your husband all the time. And those types of things are useful in two ways. Those types of phrases are useful because one, it summarizes what they've said. It it lets them know that you're listening and that you are actively listening, but it also does provide a summary to that conversation, which oftentimes then can be a nice closing to that conversation. Because if they have nothing else to share and you've done a great job summarizing back to them, they're like, yeah, you're right. And that's just what it is. And then you can maybe make that segue out and say, well, hey, if we can keep talking about this if you want, but also if you want to just go grab lunch right now, let's do it. Or let's go see a Padres game or a Yankees game, or whatever city you're in, and go do something that we used to do, and
right,
segue out.
But a lot of us are also starting to go back to our offices. I just ran into a friend in the city, in New York City, the other day, and he said, I'm coming home from work for the first time since March 2020. It feels like the first day of school. This is the first time I've seen my colleagues. So at the workplace, give us some tips for as we start, seeing colleagues that, maybe they're not like either like our best friends or even our favorite people. How can we acknowledge that it has been a tough time and, make them feel comfortable while, also still being somewhat professional with each other?
Yeah. I think this is an important conversation to have because something I anticipate whenever people start going back to the workplace is a lot more office conversations where that person who already kind of stops by cubicle to cubicle or office to office and stands in the doorway and has that conversation with you at the most inopportune time.
There's always one.
Yeah, I feel like that is going to be everybody. And so, it might make sense to really try to start making a conscious effort to hang out with some of your work buddies or colleagues before or after work or during lunch and have those conversations then. I would not ever say that you'd want to stifle those conversations, but I also think it's going to be important to draw some boundaries there and say, if during work hours, especially if you're in flow and really in the zone of what you're working on, it's okay to probably say like, hey, I really got to focus on this stuff. But like, let's have this conversation over lunch tomorrow and like really catch up and then frame it like this and specifically say, because I want to be able to give you my full attention. And I really want to like really hear about what the past year has been like from you. And if right now I'm just distracted and I can't split my attention in two. And that's just kind of, again, what I anticipate whenever we all make it back to the office is a lot of doorway lingering conversations that could actually maybe get in the way of your productivity. And right now it's still pandemic times and we're still probably all buried up to our necks in responsibilities. And so we still need to be productive. And anyways, that's just kind of what I'm anticipating. So make space for those conversations, but do it in a way where you can fully dedicate your attention to that person.
That's great advice. Coulter, I think you and I could probably talk about this for many more hours. This is scratching just like the bare minimum surface of this topic. And I'm so grateful that, you spent time with us this afternoon. It's such an important topic. People think like empathy, it's like, soft skill. It's like, it's an incredibly important skill to have. It's what enables us to build bridges with each other. It's what enables us to form deep, meaningful relationships and, even see eye to eye with people with whom we might think we would never see eye to eye, once we're really willing to hear their stories and let them share, and share our stories with them. So these tips have been really terrific, and I'm grateful to you. And so, tell us before we wrap up, where can we find you out there?
Yeah, I'm on the move right now. So, really, if you're interested in my research, you can just Google me, Cotler Ray, Coulter Colter. And then also CoulterRay.com is my personal website where you can find some of my research and links to other information on the research that I conduct. But that's probably the best way.
Great. Thank you so much, Coulter, for being with us today. And thank you to 1-800-Flowers for their interest, their support of this amazing series, Light After Loss. We've been able to have such amazing, meaningful conversations over the last several months. It's just been terrific to see, how people have been pulled in when given an invitation to, address the tough stuff, because the tough stuff exists whether you address it or not. And so that's what we're doing here. And, we're really looking forward to answering any questions that you have, to addressing any comments. So feel free to post anything. And thank you so much again. I'm Rebecca Soffer from Modern Loss, and we'll see you next time around.